What I'm going to discuss today is not on human rights in general, but I will focus on the women's rights across all sectors and across different tribes and religious beliefs, particularly on the meaningful political participation of women and emancipation, if I can use that word, or empowerment of women in the Bangsamoro. What are the gaps, what are the challenges in the ARMM and in the surrounding areas affecting the Moro women and IP women? Well, right now, if you look at statistics in the whole of ARMM, we have the highest poverty incidence rate in the country. As of 2013, the poverty incidence rate is at 48.7%. That's very high. If you look at the per province poverty incidence rate, the highest poverty incidence rate is in Lanao del Sur at 68%. That means 68% of the families who live in Lanao del Sur are poor. If you look at the total population of ARM, at 48.7% poverty incidence rate, the population is around 3.1 million. Almost half of that. Half of the families are poor. And if you look at closely at the poverty incidence rate and have a sex disaggregated data with respect to the poorest of the poorest among the poor are the women. If you look at other statistics, other rates relating to poverty incidence, for example, the poorest among the farmers are the women. The poorest among the rural women, the rural folks are the women. Okay, so it's basically the same. That is why we have the phenomenon called the feminization of practically all issues that we are facing right now, from feminization of the migrant issue, feminization of, for example, trafficking in persons. Most of the people who are trafficked are women and children. If you look at ARM, it's a conflict-affected area, and right now, it's also a natural disaster area. Previously, Mindanao is not a typhoon area, but now it's a typhoon area. In ARMM, you have Central Mindanao, in Maguindanao and Lanao del Sur. Maguindanao belongs to the plains of Mindanao. You have the big rivers of Mindanao go through Maguindanao, and also in Lanao del Sur. And so we have a very high number of internally displaced persons. This week, for example, you would have people displaced because of a RIDO, a barangay captain having a conflict with his opponent, for example, in an election, and people would be displaced. The week after, there's a typhoon or there's some heavy rain, and people would again be displaced. So there's multiple displacement and there's protracted displacement. Protracted because they stay displaced for a long period of time. Now, how does this affect women? 50 to 60% of internally displaced persons are women and children in the ARMM, based on data that we have. So when there is conflict, the negative impact, the women would bear the brunt of the displacement, of the conflict. Even if there is already a peace process between the GPH and the MILF, and the GPH and the MNLF, there's still the problem of RIDO. There's the problem of political violence. There's the problem of criminality. So we have a very insecure environment right now in the ARMM for a long time, actually, in the 25 years of the existence of the ARMM. So if you have conflict, you have displacement. There's natural disaster, there's displacement, and it affects mostly women. When they are displaced, there are gender issues that would emerge, and one of them is trafficking of women and children. So every time you go to evacuation camps, to IDP areas, there is always trafficking. There's exploitation. You would find gender-based violence happening, or violence against women and children. You would find in an area of conflict child soldiers that are children who are supposed to be in school, but undeniably, this is happening. They're being used as child soldiers. So conflict equals to displacement. Displacement results to all of these gender issues. Because of the conflict that's happening in these areas, in ARMM, in the surrounding areas in central Mindanao, many women would prefer to go abroad. So even if they haven't finished studying, they would fake their birth certificates, get fake passports, and go out and work in areas that they're not supposed to work. Like, for example, in Syria, in Libya, and even if they go to Middle East countries where they can go to work, because they're not educated, they're not prepared to be going abroad, they are exploited there. We had a study that we conducted in 2009. Ms. Saul Hakfi Bangsamoro conducted a study on the prevalence of early marriage in the ARMM. And one of the reasons why girls coming from Maguindanao particularly go abroad is because of the prospect of being married off at a very early age. And so to escape that, they go abroad, only to find out that they would be exploited abroad. Now, there are other gender issues that are present because of informal laws and the norms and cultural practices that are sometimes seen, for example, based on the one who is interpreting, as Islamic. Okay, so we have issues like child marriage and forced marriage. Forced marriage in different forms. Part of that study, the research that we did in 2009, showed that there are many girls who are below 18 who are forced to get married. Some of the practices, cultural practices, which have been codified, are considered cultural, and so they should be respected because it's the culture. They are kidnapped for marriage. It's called pagguyod in the island provinces of the ARMM. And to a certain extent, it is still being practiced until now. And you can see that in the modern form of abduction or kidnapping that is happening in Sulu. Even as we speak right now, there is a kidnapping that is happening in Sulu particularly. So you have child marriage, you have forced marriage, which is different from arranged marriages, where families of the would-be, the bride and the groom would arrange the marriage, but they consent to the marriage. Forced marriage is literally forcing them to get married. Child marriage is the marriage between children below 18 years old, and it has pernicious effects. The earlier a girl marries, the more likely is she going to suffer from a lot of consequences. She won't be able to go to school, she would get pregnant early, and she would have reproductive health issues. She would have many children, she would bear more children if she marries early. And we would have deprived her of the opportunity to be educated, to have a better life. Because if she's educated, then she can get work, she can go out into the world and survive. But if we marry her off at a very early age, on the pretext that it is sanctioned by the law, or sanctioned, and it is sanctioned by the law, it's not even a pretext. It's found under the Code of Muslim Personal Laws, Presidential Decree number 1083, that says that not just those who have reached the age of puberty can be married off, even those who have not reached the age of puberty. So there is betrothal marriage in the country, not just in the ARMM. It is allowed under the law, and it is practiced and allowed under informal laws. There's a difference between Sharia and Sharia law, fiqh, Islamic jurisprudence, and Sharia. There's a tendency to generalize and to homogenize Sharia law or Sharia. In some cases, and I know that this is being discussed, people tend to say that this is Sharia, this is Islamic, and so this is what we're going to do. And so we're going to cut off your hands if you're going to rob something. Okay. But, and as I said, it's a sensitive issue. But we have to understand the nuances of Sharia law, the different schools of thought and how the text is interpreted. And I have some recommendations based on the studies that we have made and the work that we've done together with other women's rights organizations, Muslim women's rights organizations in other parts of the world. Now, my recommendation is not just to take into account the perspectives of women, but to make them part of the structure that would determine how the Sharia judicial justice system would be established, and also how this would be expanded. We should create more spaces for women to be part of this, because Sharia or Sharia law is not just the domain of men. It affects all men and women. And half of the population are women. And so if we're not going to use that half of the population, even in terms, if we use the lens of development, that's something that's a resource, a human resource na masasayang lang, that we would not be able to make good use of. And so women should be part of that. It's not just ensuring professionalism and standardized procedures in the enforcement of the Sharia, but we have to take into consideration by creating these spaces in the structure that's going to talk about and discuss and set up the Sharia justice system and the expansion of the Sharia justice system in the Bangsamoro. And then there's the issue of political participation. And I mean this in the sense, not in the sense of running for a position in the government. Meaningful political participation would refer to not just becoming a governor or assemblyman, assemblywoman, or a barangay captain, but political participation in the sense that women would have the capacity, first, to articulate their views. They would have the capacity to provide informed decisions and informed opinions because they would have been educated. But that's the problem. If you look at the statistics with respect to education, we have in ARMM a very, very low functional literacy rate. We don't have that much members of the assembly or the sanggunian, for example, who are women. And for those who have become governors or mayors or barangay captains, in most cases they are there because they are the wife of someone who is politically influential, the wife or the daughter or the sister of the previous person holding that position. And so as to whether they are actually giving informed decisions or actually this is a decision making that they're making on their own, that remains to be seen. So if you look at the framework agreement on the Bangsamoro and the annexes that are found therein, some of the aspirations of women, Moro women and IP women, have already been incorporated. And just to cite, for example, under framework agreement on the Bangsamoro, it is clearly stated there that the right of women to meaningful political participation should be respected and that they should be protected from all forms of violence, including protection of their basic rights. If you look at the annex on power sharing, you will find a Sharia justice system, and that there's going to be set up a Hisbah for accountability. There's going to be appropriate mechanisms that will be established for consultations with women, and that special development programs would be implemented that would focus on women, the youth, the indigenous people. And we should take advantage of that. If you look at the governance structure that is found on the annex on power sharing, it states there that the assembly shall be a representative of the Bangsamoro constituent political units. And in addition to that, women should be represented in the Bangsamoro assembly. And that cuts across all groups, Moro women, IP women, settlers. And then there is going to be established a Bangsamoro Council of Leaders that will be led by the Chief Minister. And part of that Council of Leaders are the provincial governors and the mayors of the chartered cities. And it states there that there should be one representative from the women sector. If you look at the annex on normalization, it states it requires that there should be special economic programs for decommissioned women auxiliary forces of the MILF. I think if you look at the gender issues that are present in the ARMM, in the core territory of the Bangsamoro new political entity, there's a need to emphasize that in the establishment of the Bangsamoro political entity, in the establishment of the Sharia judicial system, and the indigenous people's judicial system, okay, the cultural, the customary judicial system, there's a need to be inclusive, for one, and to take note of the universal values which are considered by the Muslims as Islamic values to be incorporated and to be present at all times. Every time a provision is drafted in the Bangsamoro Basic Law, these principles should be considered. The principle of compassion, the principle of justice, gender justice, justice for everyone, the principle of equality as to rights, as to opportunities, and access to all of these opportunities, the principle of moderation, non-discrimination, and non-compulsion. And because in many cases, this is what causes all of the problems, basically. So if you compel someone to wear the hijab, for example, you're violating not just the right of that woman as a woman, but you're violating her right as a human being. If you compel a woman who is wearing the hijab to remove the hijab, you are likewise violating her right. Okay, so because there should be no compulsion on matters of faith. It is not just about non-compulsion with respect to religion, but because Islam is a way of life, and so there should be no compulsion in the manner that we live our lives. If we look at the life of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he has not compelled anyone to become a Muslim. He has not compelled anyone or forced anyone to follow his beliefs. What he did was to set an example. He set an example and people followed. And I think that's very basic, which in many cases seem to be forgotten. And so there is a need to create more spaces for everyone to talk about the Bangsamoro Basic Law, for the voices of all the sectors to be heard by the Bangsamoro Transition Commission and the government, the national government, before the Bangsamoro would be established. So I am very hopeful, and inshallah, life would be better in Mindanao, particularly in the Bangsamoro. Thank you very much.